So I know this is also pretty rinky-dink, but this is actually pretty much what the book tells you to do. The original method rather for taking this measurement on your toe in was to lift the wheel, spin the wheel, and put a centerline mark on the inside of the tread. And then you would measure the outside edge or the centerline mark from the front on both sides and the back on both sides, and the difference was supposed to be 1/8 of an inch less on the front, giving you 1/8 of an inch toe in. Well, it's really hard to do that because it's hard to get a straight line measurement across the back because there's an air tank in the way and a bunch of other stuff that kind of makes it really difficult to do. So I, years ago, started doing it this way, and you really should take the tire and spin it. Make sure that this band on the outer edge of the tread or sidewall is uniform, which this is. It's a pretty decent tire. It's a Michelin tire. And so when you spin the tire, that basically has no run out, no movement in and out. And so the first measurement that you would take would be that you would take your rod that goes all the way across, and I'll show you that, and put a line on the rod on the left side of the tire, making sure that your straight edge is lined up on the higher band of the tire on both sides. Put a line on there. And come over to the right side without moving it, being careful to make sure you don't move it, and put a line on the tape on the right side. And then I always double check it. I go back and forth a couple times to make sure I got my line in the right spot. Then the next step is to move the equipment back to the rear part of the tire, line it up the same way we have it here, and take another measurement, or line up the left side first with the original line that you have. Make sure you're right exactly on that line the way you drew it with a sharp pencil or a pointed ballpoint pen. And then come over to this side on the back and measure that distance. And that distance should be 1/8 of an inch between those two lines. Now we've taken two measurements here, it's about 1/16 of an inch. It should be increased a little bit more. But the tie rod is just 2 bolts on either side. You loosen them up. Actually, I think, yeah, it's 2 bolts on either side. You loosen them up and you turn the tie rod until you get this adjustment, and basically that's the entire front end alignment. So it's 2 measurements. It's the toe, which you do here, and the caster, which is the tilting back and forth of the axle toward the rear or the front of the bus, the kingpins. And if you have a camber problem, which is the tilt of the wheel inside and outward from the side of the vehicle, that can only be adjusted by bending the axle. Now, one other important point is these axles are hollow tube axles, and you cannot jack them up from the middle. Sometimes people do that, and it'll throw this camber alignment out, and that really does have to be done on a special machine, and it's not always possible to fix that. Sometimes it requires an axle replacement. So we know that we have our 2 measurements now, the toe and the caster, which we're talking about in this video as well. And those are the 2 measurements that you can easily do by yourself without paying a lot of money, and you can use what you see here, you know, blocks of wood, a tube, and it's pretty simple. A while ago I noticed the creaking in the front of the bus and on road bumps and, you know, different road vibrations and things, but a definite kind of a creaking noise that you can hear. And usually that's caused by the bushings in these radius rods wearing out and the metal banging back and forth against the metal. But I came down here and noticed that there was all this rust around this turnbuckle that adjusts the caster on the front of the bus. And so I realized that this bolt had come loose or gotten loose somehow or another. I got new bolts to put on it, and I decided I'd check the alignment on that, check the caster on it while I was taking these bolts out and putting the new bolts in. At any rate, this rust indicates movement in there, and that's not a good thing. So you can see a little bit of silver in here if you look close enough on this thread where I tighten that up, and that's not the way that's supposed to be. So we're going to put new bolts in here, and we're going to check this adjustment. I'll show you how I do that. Another backyard. This is about as backyard as it gets. So, homemade tool backyard adjustment. So as I said, this is a pretty backyard way to do this. Normally you would do it with a front end alignment machine, but I'm way too cheap to do that. And I've done it this way for years, and I get really good tire wear and usually have pretty good front end responsiveness. So I just do it myself. And so the book says that the kingpin, which is in the center of the axle, and it's not exactly in the center, which is why you can't use the outside of the axle to measure this, should be leaning toward the back of the bus. So this would be the back of the bus, 5/16 of an inch on a power steering bus, and on a non-power steering bus, 5/8 of an inch. So there are two things that we can see. We can see the top bushings at the top of the axle, and we can see the thrust bearing. So this goes together like this, and when you put these together, the bushing goes in on top, and then it all gets clamped together. So we can see this measurement, we can see this measurement. This is a 2.5 inch diameter, and this is a 3 1/4 inch diameter. So the difference is 3/4 of an inch. Half the difference on one side is 3/8 of an inch, the radius. And so we take the 3/8 of an inch shorter measurement that's here and measure that, or figure that into our calculation. So we want to be 5/16 of an inch this way. And if you do the subtraction, you wind up with your measurement from the bulkhead will be 1/16 of an inch greater at the top than it is at the bottom. And so that's the measurement that we're going to take inside the bus with our homemade tool. So you say, how are we going to do that? Well, I made this little tool. It's just a little stick, and I did a rough measurement. It's about 26 inches, and I drilled a hole, and then I put that screw in there so that I can turn it in and out easily by hand. And this will give us a constant measurement. When we put it in there like this, we can measure from the bulkhead to the 2 points on our kingpin down here, like this and like this, and we'll be able to see when it's 1/16 of an inch greater at the top. And that's how we're going to do that. So I took my stick and I stuck it in here, and I used a carpenter's square to make sure that we had a square between this line and the bulkhead that goes up. Here's the wheel, and that's the stick. And then I marked it with, I use whiteout. Whiteout's amazing stuff. I use it to mark a lot of things around here. You'd think it would wash off, but it stays forever. I scraped it clean so that we had the junk that was in the way that would alter the measurement, and put my two little whiteout marks in there, and then we're going to make the measurement here. So again, this is the measurement here. This is the bottom at the thrust bearing, okay? And you can see we have it in our spot back here, in our mark spot, and we're right at the thrust bearing here. And moving it up, we come to the top measurement on the right, on the back, and we're supposed to be about 1/16 of an inch away. Here, maybe, that's a little great, it might be 1/8 of an inch, and so we'll try to adjust that down to 1/16, and that's how we check the caster on the front axle. So once you get your bolts loose, the easiest way to turn this is to put a chisel in it, and it's hard for me to do right now, but I was doing it. I can't do that with one hand and hold the camera with the other. Anyway, put a chisel in it, spread it apart a little bit, and use a chisel as a handle to turn it, and you can get your adjustment. So we've turned it, we've opened it up a little bit, and I've checked the measurement, and now we're closer to where we're supposed to be, so we're going to put the new bolts in and tighten it up. And that'll be all there is to it.